Imagine living with an unshakable peace, where nothing and no one has the power to disturb you, where criticism, offenses, and problems no longer rob you of your calm. Sounds impossible, right? But the Stoics achieved it. While the world reacted with anger and frustration, they maintained their serenity, not because they didn't feel emotions, but because they had learned to master them. Today, I'm going to reveal how you can do the same. If you apply these teachings, you will never get angry or annoyed with anyone again. Not because the world will change, but because you will have changed. Before we begin, go to the comments and write, "Today, my best version begins. I am Stoic." With this, you commit to taking control of your mind and living with discipline. Write it now, and let's begin. Number 1. The destructive nature of anger. Anger is one of the most destructive emotions a human being can experience. It not only harms those around us, but it also corrodes us from within, weakening our minds and dragging us toward decisions we will sooner or later regret. The Stoics considered it one of the greatest threats to virtue because when anger takes control, we cease to be rational and become slaves to our impulses. It is not a sign of strength, but of weakness, proof that we have lost control over ourselves. Anger is like an uncontrollable fire. It starts with a spark, perhaps a misinterpreted word, an action we consider unjust, or an unexpected obstacle. If we give it oxygen with ruminating thoughts, it quickly grows into a blaze that devastates our mental clarity, our relationships, and our well-being. Marcus Aurelius warned that the best way to combat anger is to prevent it from being born in the first place. If we learn to recognize its first signs, we can extinguish it before it consumes us completely. The consequences of anger are devastating. It not only causes unnecessary conflicts, but it also affects our health. Science confirms what the Stoics already knew. Anger raises blood pressure, weakens the immune system, and can trigger cardiovascular problems. It is not just a momentary emotion. It is a poison that, if allowed to grow, destroys both body and mind. Epictetus taught that it is not external circumstances that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. If someone insults us, it is not the insult that harms us, but the importance we give it. Learning to control our perception is the first step to mastering anger. When we let ourselves be carried away by anger, our actions become irrational. In the moment, it may seem justifiable to shout, insult, or even hit something. But when the storm passes, we realize that we have only made the situation worse. An outburst of anger can destroy relationships that took years to build. An impulsive comment can leave wounds that never fully heal. Seneca said that anger is like a momentary delirium, a state in which we are no longer masters of our words and actions. If we observe ourselves carefully, we will see that most of our angry reactions are disproportionate and illogical. Imagine an argument with a loved one. In the heat of the moment, harsh words seem necessary. But once everything calms down, we realize that we could have handled the situation with more wisdom. Most problems can be solved with dialogue and patience, but anger blinds our ability to reason. Instead of seeking solutions, we seek revenge, and with it, we only feed a cycle of resentment and pain. The Stoics teach us that the best way to combat anger is through self-discipline and reflection. Marcus Aurelius recommended remembering that life is short and that most of the problems that infuriate us are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Seneca suggested practicing patience and indifference to provocations. True strength is not in responding with violence, but in maintaining calm when everything around us seems to want to throw us off balance. Anger is an internal enemy, a beast that, if not tamed, can consume us. But the good news is that we can train ourselves not to be carried away by it. The next time you feel anger rising, stop. Ask yourself if it's really worth it. Remember that no external circumstance has power over you unless you give it to it. Peace is not found in the absence of provocations, but in the ability to face them with equanimity and control. Number 2. All negative emotions arise from unfulfilled expectations. Negative emotions are not born from what happens, but from what we expected to happen and didn't. Frustration, anger, sadness, resentment. All these feelings have a common root, the difference between reality and our expectations. When we believe the world should behave in a certain way and it doesn't, we feel that we have been failed. But in reality, the failure is in us, in the distorted image we create in our minds. We cling to an illusion, and when reality destroys it, instead of adapting, we react with suffering. We get angry because people don't act as we want, because the results are not what we expected, because life doesn't follow the script we wrote in our minds. We believe we deserve certain treatments, certain successes, certain clear paths, but the world doesn't follow our rules. Frustration doesn't come from the event itself, but from the clash between what we desired and what actually happened. Seneca said that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality, because what hurts us most is not what happens, but our interpretation of it. If we learn to accept events without resistance, we could avoid much unnecessary pain. Imagine someone who believes their partner will never cheat on them because that's how it should be. They have built an expectation based on their own vision of what is right. But if the betrayal occurs, the anger arises not from the act itself, but from the contrast with the idealized image they had created. Instead of accepting reality as it is, they fight against it in their mind, and that internal conflict becomes suffering. Another example is the person who expects their friends to always be there for them, for the traffic to be light, for their boss to value their effort. But when any of this doesn't happen, they feel disappointment and anger because they assumed the world had to follow their rules. The Stoics teach us that the key to inner peace is to eliminate unrealistic expectations. It's not about resignation, but about understanding that the world owes us nothing. We cannot control the behavior of others or external events, only our reaction to them. Epictetus said that we should accept what happens as if we had chosen it because resisting only generates suffering. If we stop expecting people to treat us in a certain way, if we accept that they can fail us, that life doesn't follow a predictable order, we eliminate much of the stress and frustration. Accepting reality as it is doesn't mean we shouldn't have goals or desires, but it does mean we should be prepared for any outcome. We can strive to achieve something, but without clinging to the idea that it must happen exactly as we want. Otherwise, failure will destroy us. Disappointment doesn't come from life, but from our resistance to accepting its unexpected turns. A Stoic understands that everything changes, that nothing is guaranteed, and therefore doesn't allow their emotions to be dictated by the external. If we eliminate rigid expectations, we stop demanding that the world adapt to our beliefs. Instead of getting frustrated when something doesn't go well, we ask ourselves what we can learn. Instead of feeling betrayed, we understand that people act according to their own nature, not the one we imagined for them. Peace is found in flexibility, in the ability to accept what comes without resistance. Happiness is not in making everything fit our expectations, but in learning to flow with reality without it robbing us of our tranquility. Number 3. Anger is a reflection of the ego. Anger is nothing more than a reflection of a wounded ego. When we feel that someone disrespects us, treats us unfairly, or doesn't recognize our worth, we react with anger because our sense of identity feels threatened. We believe we deserve different treatment, that others should see us as we see ourselves. And when that doesn't happen, we feel that they have violated something sacred in us. But the truth is that anger doesn't arise from what others do, but from our interpretation of their actions. It is our ego that demands recognition, that gets offended, that needs to defend its image. If that ego were not so prominent, if we didn't take things so personally, anger would lose its power over us. When someone speaks to us rudely, our first reaction is to think that they are attacking us. But what if that person is just having a bad day? What if their words have nothing to do with us, but with their own internal chaos? The reality is that most of the time, the actions of others are not a reflection of us, but of themselves. However, the ego makes us believe that everything revolves around us. We tell ourselves, he disrespected me. He made me look bad. He didn't value me. But what if we simply stopped seeing ourselves as the center of every situation? If we understood that the behavior of others is their burden, not ours, we could free ourselves from anger. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that it is not what happens that disturbs us, but our opinion about it. If someone insults us, the insult itself has no power until we give it meaning. We can choose to ignore it. We can see it as a reflection of the other person and move on without it affecting our peace. But the ego wants to fight. It wants to defend itself. It wants to prove that it is right. And in that desire to defend our image, we fall into the trap of anger, losing control and acting impulsively. But if someone's insult doesn't change who we are, if their attitude doesn't define us, why allow it to drag us into a state of uncontrollability? A clear example is when we are in traffic and someone cuts us off. The ego tells us that it is a lack of respect, that we must react, that we cannot allow them to treat us like that. But the other driver didn't think about us. They didn't plan to offend us. They are simply trapped in their own world. However, our ego turns the situation into something personal, and with that, anger takes over our mind. If, instead of reacting, we simply accepted it as something that happens in any other context, at work, in relationships, in daily interactions, our reaction is not caused by the events themselves, but by the story we tell ourselves about them. The Stoics teach us that the key to controlling anger is to recognize the role our ego plays in it. If we improve our self-esteem, if we stop needing the validation of others, if we understand that our worth doesn't depend on how they treat us, we can be immune to provocations. Seneca said that the best revenge is not to be like the one who has harmed us. If someone treats us badly and we respond with anger, we are letting them control us. But if we maintain our calm, if we choose not to enter their game, we demonstrate true strength. Anger is a reflection of an ego that has not yet learned to detach from the opinions of others. But when we understand that others do not have the power to define us, that their words and actions speak more about them than about us, we free ourselves. It is not about allowing abuse or accepting everything in silence, but about learning to react with intelligence and not from emotion. Inner peace is not achieved by controlling others, but by controlling our reaction to them. When the ego ceases to be the center of our existence, anger loses its dominion over us. Number 4. Forgiveness frees us from anger. Anger is a heavy burden that we often carry without realizing it. We hold on to resentment because we believe that by doing so, we are punishing the one who has wronged us. But in reality, the only one being punished is ourselves. Anger consumes our peace, locks us in a mental prison, and prevents us from moving forward. Forgiveness, on the other hand, is the key that opens that cell. It doesn't mean justifying what was done to us or naively forgetting, but freeing ourselves from the need to continue suffering for something that has already passed. Forgiving is not a gift for the other person. It is an act of self-love, an essential step to regaining our tranquility. When we hold on to anger, we relive the pain over and over again. Our mind becomes a battlefield where the past is still present, where we continue to give power to the one who hurt us. But why carry that anger? Marcus Aurelius said that the best punishment for someone who has wronged us is not to be like them. If someone betrayed, offended, or hurt us, continuing to feel resentment only prolongs the control that person has over us. Forgiving, on the other hand, gives us back the power, allows us to release the weight and move on without the past defining us. Resentment is a trap of the ego. It makes us believe that if we forgive, we are showing weakness. But the reality is the opposite. Strength lies in who has control over their emotions, in who decides to let go of what hurts them instead of clinging to it. Seneca taught that we should not allow anger to dictate our actions because when we act with anger, we are not masters of ourselves. If someone hurts us and we respond with resentment, we are giving them power over our peace. But if instead we choose to forgive, we regain control of our minds and our well-being. Imagine someone who has been betrayed by a close friend. The natural reaction is anger, disappointment, the desire for revenge. But how long can that feeling be sustained without becoming a burden? Resentment doesn't affect the betrayer. It affects the one who carries it. Every time you think about the betrayal, the pain is relived. On the other hand, if you decide to forgive, If you accept that what happened cannot be changed and that the past should not define your present, you find freedom. It's not about trusting the one who betrayed us again, but about stopping allowing their action to continue affecting us. Forgiveness is a conscious choice. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always easy, but it is the path to inner peace. Epictetus reminded us that we have no control over what others do, only over our reaction. If someone offends us, it is not the offense itself that hurts us, but the importance we give it. By forgiving, we stop feeding that importance. We understand that each person acts from their own level of consciousness and that their behavior is a reflection of their inner world, not ours. It doesn't mean allowing abuse or tolerating injustice, but learning to let go of the resentment that prevents us from living in peace. When we forgive, we don't release the other person. We release ourselves. We stop dragging an unnecessary weight. We stop wasting energy on a conflict that only exists in our minds. True revenge is not in doing harm, but in showing that the harm has not changed us, that we continue forward without anger consuming us. Peace is not found in waiting for others to repent, but in deciding that our happiness does not depend on their behavior. To forgive is to release the poison of anger and embrace the freedom that comes with serenity. Number 5, practice non-reaction. When something irritates us, when we feel provoked or attacked, the first reaction that arises is impulsive, charged with emotion. We want to respond immediately. We want to defend ourselves. We want to prove that we are right. But at that moment, our mind is not operating from reason, but from instinct. And that is where we make mistakes, where we say things we later regret, where we worsen situations instead of solving them. The practice of non-reaction allows us to avoid this. It gives us control over our responses and protects us from the emotional exhaustion that impulsive reactions generate. When we take a moment before responding, when we resist the urge to act immediately, we gain power over ourselves. It is not about being indifferent or repressing our emotions, but about training ourselves not to be slaves to them. Marcus Aurelius said that the best way to defend oneself from an offense is not to resemble the one who offended us. If someone insults you, if someone criticizes you harshly, reacting with anger is falling into their game, it is allowing them to have power over you. But if you remain calm, if you choose not to respond at the moment, you show that you have control, that your peace does not depend on the attitude of others. In daily life, the opportunities to practice non-reaction are constant. A co-worker who makes a hurtful comment, an aggressive driver in traffic, a family member who seeks to argue. In each of these moments, the decision is in your hands. You can react immediately and feed the conflict, or you can take a breath, observe the situation from a distance, and respond with intelligence. Epictetus taught that it is not what happens that affects us, but the way we interpret it. If someone criticizes you in a meeting and you take it as a personal attack, you get angry and react defensively. But if instead you take a moment, breathe, and analyze if it is really worth responding, you can act with calm and professionalism, without allowing emotion to control your behavior. Non-reaction is a sign of strength. Most people act on impulse, enslaved by their emotions. When someone irritates them, they react without thinking. They let anger take control. But the real power is in who is able to resist that first reaction, in who knows that they don't need to prove anything, in who chooses when and how to act. Seneca reminded us that time is a great filter for emotions. What today seems like an unforgivable offense in a few days will lose importance. What now irritates us deeply, in a few hours will seem insignificant. That is why not reacting immediately allows us to gain perspective. It gives us the opportunity to see the situation clearly before deciding what to do. Practicing non-reaction does not mean accepting everything in silence or letting others walk all over us. It means acting from reason, not from emotion. If something really deserves a response, the best response will be the one we give when our mind is calm. Instead of responding to fire with more fire, we respond with intelligence, with equanimity, not because we are weak, but because we understand that our peace is worth more than a meaningless argument. Every time you feel the urge to react, remember that you can choose not to. You can let the emotion pass, You can observe it without being carried away by it. And when you do, you will notice something incredible. Conflicts will decrease, anxiety will be reduced, and the people who used to provoke you will lose power over you. Non-reaction is the door to true freedom, the ability to decide how and when to respond without being a slave to external stimuli. Number 6, the relationship between low self-esteem and anger. Anger is often nothing more than a reflection of insecurity. When we are not at peace with ourselves, any comment, any look, any situation that challenges our self-image irritates us. It is not the situation itself that infuriates us, but what it awakens in us. If someone criticizes us and that makes us angry, the problem is not in the criticism, but in the importance we give it. If we were sure of who we are, if our self-esteem were strong, we would not need to react with anger. We would simply ignore it. When our confidence is fragile, any blow shakes our foundations, and we respond with anger as a defense mechanism. Insecurity creates a perception of vulnerability. We feel that we must constantly protect our image, that others are judging us, that any negative comment is a threat. The mind interprets these situations as personal attacks and responds with aggression. But the reality is that no one has the power to make us feel less if we don't give them permission. Epictetus said that we are not affected by what others say about us, but by the opinion we have about those words. If we believe we are weak, that we are not good enough, any criticism will reinforce it, and the immediate reaction will be anger. On the other hand, if we have a solid image of ourselves, nothing external can disturb us. I remember a time when I had gained weight. Every comment about my appearance made me react with anger. I told myself it was because of the disrespect of others, but the truth was that I wasn't angry with them. I was angry with myself. I didn't like what I saw in the mirror, and any external observation confirmed it. It wasn't their opinion that hurt me, but my own. The anger didn't come from them. It came from the insecurity I felt. Over time, I understood that the problem wasn't the people, but my lack of control over myself. Instead of wasting energy reacting with anger, I decided to take action. I worked on my health, my discipline, my mentality, and when I did, the same comments that used to make me angry stopped affecting me. Not because they had changed, but because I had changed. Low self-esteem makes us interpret reality in a distorted way. We believe that others are constantly judging us, that the world is a hostile place where we must always be on the defensive. But the problem is not the external world, but the way we perceive it. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that if something external disturbs us, the problem is not in the thing itself, but in our judgment about it. If someone tells you something that offends you, ask yourself, why does this affect me? Is it because deep down I'm afraid it's true? Is it because I have doubts about myself? Most of the time, the answer is yes. Anger is a defensive reaction to insecurity. When we improve our self-esteem, anger loses its power over us. We become less reactive, more serene, more focused on what really matters. We don't need to prove anything to anyone because we already know who we are. The opinion of others ceases to be a threat because our value does not depend on their approval. The Stoics teach us that true strength is not in imposing our will on others, but in governing ourselves. Anger is a sign that something within us is still unresolved. Instead of reacting impulsively, we can use those moments as signals of what we still need to work on. Every time you feel anger over a comment or a situation, stop for a moment. Ask yourself if it is really the comment that bothers you or if there is something deeper behind it. Use anger as a mirror to see in which aspects of yourself you still need to work. When you manage to improve your self-esteem, when you take responsibility for your life, anger is no longer necessary. There is no longer any insecurity to protect, no longer any fear to hide. All that remains is the calm of someone who knows themselves, who accepts themselves, and who does not need to react to what does not define them. Number 7, the importance of living with purpose. When you don't have a clear purpose, life feels empty, chaotic, without direction. You wake up each day without a real reason to move, without something that motivates you beyond routine. And that feeling of emptiness creates frustration. The lack of purpose turns people into irritable, reactive beings, always on the defensive. Any inconvenience, any obstacle, feels bigger than it really is because there is nothing bigger to focus on. Without direction, the mind is filled with noise and disorder, and in that state, it is easy to fall into anger and resentment. The Stoics understood that the key to mental peace is to have a purpose aligned with our values, something that makes us feel that our existence has meaning. When you live without a defined purpose, everything becomes a distraction. The traffic bothers you, the words of others irritate you, you feel that life is unfair. But when you have a purpose, those same things lose importance, not because they cease to exist, but because your focus is on something greater. Marcus Aurelius said that each of us should ask ourselves, what am I here for? What really matters in my life? Because when you have clarity in that answer, the small frustrations stop controlling you. You don't waste time reacting to every provocation because your energy is concentrated on something significant. There was a time in my life when I had no direction. I felt trapped in a meaningless routine, doing things that did not fulfill me. And the consequence of that was constant irritability. Anything bothered me. Any problem seemed huge because I had no real reason to get up every morning. I lived on autopilot, letting circumstances dictate my mood. But when I found my purpose, everything changed. I decided to focus on creating content, on sharing ideas that can help others, on building something that made sense to me. And when I did, I realized that the problems that once seemed unbearable were now just part of the journey. I was no longer irritated by small things because I had a bigger vision. Anger ceased to be a habitual reaction because there was something more valuable to concentrate on. The Stoics teach us that purpose is not something you find, but something you define. You don't have to wait for life to hand it to you. You must create it yourself. Epictetus said that each person has the responsibility to decide what they want to become, what they want to contribute to the world. It's not about waiting for inspiration, but about taking action, about seeking what really makes us feel alive. When you discover your purpose and work on it, your mind changes. Frustration decreases because you no longer worry so much about what you cannot control. You don't need external validation. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You simply do what you know you must do, and that fills you with satisfaction. When you live with purpose, life stops feeling like a series of problems and starts to look like an opportunity. You no longer react with anger to every obstacle because you understand that challenges are part of the path. Every day has meaning. Every action contributes to something bigger. And when that happens, peace becomes a natural state. Not because everything is perfect, but because you have decided where to focus your energy. There is no room for anger when you are busy building something that really matters. If you feel that life frustrates you, if you realize that you react with anger too easily, ask yourself if you really have a clear purpose. Ask yourself if you are dedicating your time to something that fulfills you, or if you are simply passing the days without direction. The difference between a life full of frustration and a life full of meaning lies in that answer. Find what motivates you, what makes you want to get up every morning with the desire to move forward. And when you do, you will see how anger loses its power over you, because when you have a purpose, everything else becomes background noise. Number 8. Using neuroplasticity to reprogram your emotional response. The brain is not fixed in a single way of reacting. Thanks to neuroplasticity, we can train it to respond differently to situations that previously caused us anger or frustration. The idea that we are like this and cannot change is a lie we tell ourselves. The brain is malleable, and just like a muscle, it can be strengthened in certain areas depending on how we train it. If every time something irritates us, we respond with anger, we are reinforcing that neural connection, making anger an automatic reaction. But if instead we learn to respond calmly, over time, that will become our brain's new programming. When we face a situation that would normally make us explode, our instinct is to follow the pattern. If someone insults us, if something doesn't go as expected, if a person acts disrespectfully, the immediate reaction is the one we have reinforced over the years. But here's the key. If we consciously force ourselves to respond in a different way, we are creating a new neural pathway. At first it feels forced, uncomfortable, even fake, But with repetition, the brain begins to accept that response as the normal one, and eventually, calm becomes our automatic reaction. I remember a time when my dog destroyed an object that was important to me. My usual reaction would have been to get angry, raise my voice, feel that internal explosion of frustration. But at that moment, I decided to do something different. Instead of giving in to anger, I forced myself to take a deep breath and pet my dog. It was extremely difficult. I felt like I was repressing my emotion, but in reality, what I was doing was teaching my brain that not everything has to be an angry response. I repeated it over and over again, every time my dog did something that would normally irritate me. And over time, I noticed that my natural response changed. I no longer felt that tightness in my chest. I no longer needed to hold back, because my brain had learned that those situations were not a threat, that they did not require anger as a response. Neuroplasticity shows us that we are not condemned to be prisoners of our emotions. We can redirect our impulses and make calm our new normal. Every time we choose not to react with anger, we strengthen the neural connection of patience and equanimity. And the more we do it, the more natural it becomes. Marcus Aurelius said that we cannot control what happens, but we can control our reaction to it. And that is not just a philosophical principle. It is a scientific reality. The brain changes based on what we practice. And if we practice serenity, eventually it will be our default response. This process is not immediate. At first, the mind will try to return to the old patterns because it is what it knows, what is familiar to it. But if we are persistent, if every time we feel anger rising, we force ourselves to stop, breathe, and respond differently, we will see a real change. One day, we will realize that situations that would have made us explode before now seem insignificant. And not because we are repressing anger, but because our brain has decided that there is no reason to feel it. Anger is a habit, just as calm is. If we feed anger, it grows and strengthens. But if we ignore it and instead cultivate serenity, it eventually weakens and disappears. It is not about pretending, but about retraining our minds to work in a way that benefits us instead of harming us. If we want to be calmer, more balanced, wiser in our responses, we have to practice it day after day. And with repetition, the time will come when calm is not an effort, but simply who we are. Number 9. Love and gratitude overcome anger. Anger is a consuming, draining emotion that makes us lose control of our own minds. But there are two forces that have the power to dispel it: love and gratitude. When we are trapped in anger, it is because our attention is fixed on the negative, on what bothers us, on what we believe is wrong. We focus on the lack, on the frustration, on the injustice. But if instead we direct our minds towards what we love and what we are grateful for, anger loses its power. Not because the problems disappear, but because we stop giving it the energy it needs to continue affecting us. Love connects us with what really matters. If we are angry with someone, we can ask ourselves, do I prefer to win this argument or preserve the relationship? When you love someone, the need to prove you are right becomes secondary. Anger is selfish. It seeks revenge. It seeks to prove a point. But love seeks to understand, to build, to unite. Many times we get carried away by anger in trivial situations. We react without thinking and end up hurting the people we care about most. But if in those moments we remember what we feel for them, if we take a moment to connect with love instead of rage, the response changes. Gratitude is another powerful antidote. When we are grateful, there is no room for anger. We cannot feel resentment and gratitude at the same time. If something bothers us, we can stop and do a simple exercise. Think of 3 things we are grateful for at that moment. Maybe it's our health, a special person in our life, the opportunity to learn from the situation. This simple act changes the direction of our thoughts, takes us out of the reactive state, and gives us back control. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations about the importance of remembering the fleetingness of life. If today were the last day with someone you love, would you really waste time being angry with that person? Gratitude reminds us that every moment is valuable and that anger is a waste of our time and energy. Some time ago, I decided to do a little experiment on myself. Every time I felt anger or frustration, instead of reacting as I normally would, I forced myself to think of something I was grateful for in that instant. At first it felt forced, as if I were ignoring reality. But over time, I realized that my mind began to do it automatically. One day, someone spoke to me with contempt, and instead of feeling irritated, the first thing I thought was, I am grateful that today I have my health and can keep moving forward. That thought allowed me to respond calmly, without feeding the conflict. Not because the other person deserved it, but because I deserved to maintain my peace. The Stoics understood that our emotions are not a product of what happens outside, but of what we decide to think about it. If we focus on injustice, on what we lack, on what bothers us, anger grows. But if instead we focus on what we have, on what we love, on what we are grateful for, anger fades. It is not a mental trick. It is a way of training our minds to see reality from a higher perspective. Epictetus said that the secret of happiness is not in having more, but in wanting less. When we cultivate gratitude, we realize that we already have enough, that we don't need to react with anger because life is still good despite the small setbacks. We cannot avoid moments of tension or control how others act, but we can decide which emotions we want to feed our minds with. If we choose love and gratitude, anger will not be able to find a space to grow. When we love, we understand. When we are grateful, we let go. And in that daily practice, little by little, we become more serene, more centered, and less prone to reacting from anger. Not because the world changes, but because we learn to see it in a different way. Number 10. Establishing healthy boundaries. If you don't establish boundaries, you allow others to decide how to treat you. It's not about being confrontational or rejecting others, but about defining the limits of your patience, your time, and your energy. When you don't set clear boundaries, you send the message that it's okay for them to disrespect you, to interrupt you constantly, to not value your time. And when this happens, frustration grows, anger accumulates, and you end up emotionally exhausted. But the responsibility for setting those boundaries is not on others. It's yours. Only you can decide what you allow and what you don't. Many times, we allow certain behaviors for fear of appearing selfish or unpleasant. We find it hard to say no because we fear that the other person will be offended or reject us. But the real problem is not saying no, but not saying it when it's necessary. If someone constantly interrupts you at work, if a friend only looks for you when they need something, if a family member criticizes you without reason, is it really your responsibility to accept that? Seneca said that we cannot control how others act, but we can control how we position ourselves in front of them. If we allow them to treat us inappropriately without reacting, we are giving them permission to continue doing so. When someone crosses a boundary and we don't put a stop to it, what we are doing is reinforcing that behavior. If someone criticizes you unfairly and you say nothing, that person will assume that it is normal to treat you that way. But if, calmly and firmly, you establish that you do not accept that type of treatment, you are sending a clear message. You value yourself enough not to allow disrespect. You don't need to be aggressive or argue. You just need to be clear. I will not tolerate these types of comments. My time is valuable. Please respect it. I don't feel comfortable with this. These simple phrases can completely change the dynamic of a relationship. I remember a time when I allowed myself to be constantly interrupted. No matter what I was doing, if someone wanted my attention, I would drop everything and respond. At first, I thought that made me a good person, but over time, I realized that I was just allowing others to prioritize their needs over mine. I felt frustrated, exhausted, but it wasn't the fault of others. I never set a boundary. One day, I decided to change it. When someone interrupted me, I would simply say, "I'm busy now, let's talk later." At first, it was hard for me, but little by little, others understood that my time is also important. And the most surprising thing was that I didn't lose any important relationships. In fact, I began to feel more respected. The Stoics understood that setting boundaries is not an act of rejection, but of self-respect. Epictetus said that we must decide which things are under our control and which are not. We cannot prevent someone from trying to cross our boundaries, but we can decide how we react. If every time someone treats you badly, you allow it in silence, you are not being virtuous. You are abandoning your responsibility to protect your well-being. Saying no is an act of courage, not because it is easy, but because it shows that you know and respect yourself. Establishing boundaries does not mean pushing people away. On the contrary, it means creating healthier relationships where both sides know what to expect and what is acceptable. Many times, people don't even realize they are crossing a boundary until someone tells them. You can't expect others to guess what bothers you. You must communicate it to them. And if, even after that, they still don't respect it, then you have to ask yourself if you really want that person to remain in your life. Every time you decide not to set a boundary for fear of conflict, you are choosing internal conflict over external conflict. You are choosing your discomfort in order to avoid a difficult conversation. But the reality is that avoiding the problem does not solve it. Learning to say no without guilt is one of the most valuable skills you can develop, not because it makes you stronger in front of others, but because it makes you stronger within yourself. Setting boundaries is not about controlling others. It is about protecting your peace and living with dignity. Number 11. Not everything deserves your attention. Not everything deserves your attention. Every day we face provocations, unnecessary comments, insignificant problems that try to drag us into chaos. But the reality is that most of these things have no real importance. We wear ourselves out emotionally by reacting to the trivial, to what will be irrelevant tomorrow. We live in a world where everyone has an opinion, where criticism is constant, where minor problems can seem large if we don't learn to filter what really matters. The key to maintaining mental peace is to understand that not everything that happens around us deserves our energy. Every time something bothers you, stop for a moment and ask yourself, does this really matter? In a month, a year, will I even remember it? Most of the time, the answer will be no. However, we let ourselves be carried away by the emotion of the moment. We feel the need to respond, to defend ourselves, to react. But if we observe from the perspective of life as a whole, we realize that many things are just distractions. Marcus Aurelius said that tranquility comes when we learn to ignore what does not concern us. If someone insults you on the street, does it really change anything in your life? If a stranger on social media criticizes you, does that have any real impact on who you are? Wasting energy on every little provocation only takes us away from what really matters. Imagine that someone makes a rude comment about you. The immediate impulse is to respond, to defend yourself, to prove that you are right. But what do you gain from that? Is it really worth investing your energy in that discussion? A comment does not define your value. A criticism does not change who you are. If every time someone says something negative about you, you react, you are handing over your peace to anyone who decides to provoke you. Epictetus taught us that we should not be slaves to the opinions of others. If something does not contribute to your growth, if it does not change the course of your life, then it does not deserve your attention. Most of the worries we carry are not ours. We stress about what others think, about problems we cannot control, about expectations that do not even belong to us. We spend too much time worrying about what they will say, about the approval of others, about situations that, deep down, do not affect our essence. But when you understand that your energy is limited, you begin to be more selective with what you give importance to. It doesn't mean being indifferent, but knowing how to differentiate between what really deserves your effort and what is just noise. I remember a time when any criticism affected me. If someone questioned what I was doing, I felt the need to explain myself, to justify myself, to prove that I was right. But over time, I understood that this was a waste of energy. I learned to observe before reacting, to ask myself if it was really worth it. And most of the time, the best answer was silence. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because it simply wasn't necessary. Not everything requires a response. Not everything deserves a conflict. Not everything deserves our attention. Every time you decide to ignore what is not relevant, you are protecting your mental peace. You are training your mind to focus on what really adds up, on what really transforms. The Stoics did not seek to control the world, but to control their response to it. If someone acts with malice, if someone tries to provoke you, remember that you have the option of not responding. Strength is not in winning every battle, but in choosing wisely which battles are worth fighting. When you filter what really matters, you discover that many of your worries dissolve. The energy you used to spend on useless discussions can now be used to build, to learn, to improve. You cannot prevent people from criticizing. You cannot control what others say or do, but you can decide if it is worth letting that affect your mental state. In the end, true freedom is not doing what you want, but not being dominated by what doesn't matter. Number 12. The importance of separating facts from beliefs. Many times, we suffer not because of what really happens, but because of what we believe it means. We live trapped in interpretations, in the stories we tell ourselves and about others. But most of these stories are not facts. They are just beliefs that we have accepted without question. And those beliefs can be the biggest obstacle to our mental peace. The Stoics teach us that the key to tranquility is to learn to differentiate between what is a fact and what is just our perception of that fact. When we don't make this distinction, we get entangled in unnecessary emotions. We react with anger, with sadness, with fear, without realizing that we are reacting to something that is not real. If someone tells us we are useless, it is not the comment itself that hurts us, but our decision to believe it. The objective fact is that someone uttered some words, but our mind turns those words into an absolute truth. Maybe they're right. What if I really am like that? And suddenly, a simple opinion becomes a burden we carry for years. We don't stop to question if it's true. We simply absorb it. Epictetus warned us about this. He reminded us that it is not the events that affect us, but our interpretation of them. If someone criticizes us, we can see it as an opportunity to improve or as a personal attack. The difference between both responses is not in the facts, but in our beliefs. The human mind is an expert at creating stories. We tell ourselves that we are not good enough, that we don't deserve certain things, that we can never change. And the worst part is that we believe in these stories as if they were irrefutable facts. But where do they really come from? Often from past experiences, from the words of other people, from mistakes we made at some point and that we have turned into permanent labels. If one day we fail at something, we tell ourselves, I am a failure. If someone rejected us, we believe we are not worthy of love. But none of these thoughts are facts. They are just interpretations, beliefs that we have strengthened over time without realizing that we can change them. I remember a time when I believed I wasn't smart enough to achieve certain things. Not because there was evidence of it, but because at some point in my life, someone made me feel that way, and I decided to accept it as truth. Every time I faced a challenge, that belief came back. You can't do it. You're not capable. But one day, I decided to question it. Where was the real proof that I was incapable? Hadn't I learned many things in my life? Hadn't I overcome difficulties before? I realized that this belief was not a fact. It was just a story I was telling myself. And by understanding that, I began to let it go. It wasn't immediate, but with every thought I challenged, I regained control. The Stoics practiced mental self-discipline, the ability to examine their own thoughts and filter what really deserved attention. They did not accept any emotion or idea without first analyzing it. Marcus Aurelius advised us to ask ourselves about any negative thought. Is this true? Is it really as terrible as I think? Most of the time, the answer was no. We are not as limited as we think. We are not the labels that have been put on us. We do not have to be slaves to beliefs that hold us back. But to free ourselves from them, we must first recognize that they are not absolute facts. Every time you feel that a belief about yourself limits you, question it. Ask if it is really true or if you have simply accepted it without proof. If you can replace it with a more realistic version, you will have taken a huge step towards emotional freedom. Separating facts from beliefs is the way to stop being prisoners of our minds. It is the way we regain control, the way we stop reacting automatically and start living with true clarity. When we learn to see reality without the distortions of our beliefs, we find the peace that has always been there, waiting to be discovered. Number 13. Developing a healthy self-image. Your self-image cannot depend on the opinions of others. If you live through the eyes of the world, you will be a prisoner of its approval. One day they praise you and you feel invincible, but the next day they criticize you and you collapse. That instability is the result of building your value on external foundations, on something you cannot control. But when your perception of yourself is born from self-knowledge and acceptance, no one can take away your peace. The Stoics understood that true strength comes from looking inward, from defining who you are without waiting for external validation. Only when you stop depending on what others think can you begin to live with true freedom. The problem arises when our self-image is formed based on imposed beliefs. From a young age, we absorb opinions, labels, judgments that we don't even question. If someone tells us we are shy, we accept it. If they call us failures, we believe it. But how much of that is really true? How much of our identity is built on ideas that we never analyzed? Marcus Aurelius reminded us that we must ask ourselves if what we believe about ourselves is true or just a story we tell ourselves. The key is in self-knowledge, in observing ourselves without filters, without illusions, without self-deception. Accepting our strengths and also our weaknesses, not from self-complacency, but from honesty. When someone criticizes you, the automatic reaction is to defend yourself, to feel hurt, or to try to prove the opposite. But what if instead of that, you stop and reflect? If someone says you are selfish, instead of reacting with anger, you could ask yourself, is this true? Do I really act this way? If the answer is yes, then you have an opportunity to improve. If the answer is no, then the criticism has no weight, and you can let it go without it affecting you. Epictetus taught that we should not be concerned with what they say about us, but with whether what they say is true. It is not the criticism that harms us, but our interpretation of it. If your self-image is strong, the words of others lose power. For years, I worried too much about how others saw me. I strived to fit in, to be accepted, to meet external expectations. But all of that took me away from who I really was. I didn't make decisions based on what I wanted, but on what I thought I should do to be approved of. And that kept me in a constant struggle because it was never enough. There was always someone with a different opinion, always something to change to please another. It was when I understood that I could never control what others thought of me that everything changed. I stopped trying to fit in and started asking myself, who am I really? What do I want for myself? And in that process, the need for validation faded away. Self-acceptance does not mean conformity. It is not resigning yourself to be as you are without seeking to improve. It is simply recognizing your value without depending on external factors. When you accept who you are, with your strengths and weaknesses, with your successes and mistakes, you free yourself from the fear of judgment. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to demonstrate your worth, because you already have it. And the most powerful thing is that when you stop seeking approval, you become more authentic. The people who really matter respect you for who you are, not for who you try to be. True emotional freedom comes when you stop living according to others and start living according to your truth. It doesn't mean ignoring all external opinions, but learning to filter what really deserves your attention and what doesn't. If you know yourself, if you have clarity about your values and your purpose, criticism ceases to be a threat. You live with confidence, with tranquility, without the need to impress anyone. Not because you are perfect, but because you no longer need the world to validate your existence. And in that clarity, you find the peace that was always within you. Number 14, the fallacy of good and bad. No person is completely good or completely bad. We are all a mixture of successes and mistakes, of moments of lucidity and moments of weakness. But the human mind tends to simplify, to put labels, to classify others as good or bad according to what suits us or according to our experience with them. However, this way of thinking is a fallacy, a distortion of reality that prevents us from understanding the complexity of human beings. When we see someone only through a label, we stop seeing them as they really are. A person's actions can be just or unjust, generous or selfish, But reducing someone to a single category prevents us from understanding them. An individual who acts with cruelty today may be the same one who shows compassion tomorrow. A man who has made mistakes can also do good. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that we should see others for what they are. Fallible human beings, conditioned by their history, their fears, their experiences. No one is just one thing. No one is completely defined by their best or worst moments. And when we understand this, we free ourselves from judgment and the emotional burden that comes with it. When someone treats us badly, our instinct is to label them as a bad person. We think they are unfair, that they are cruel, that they deserve punishment. But do we ever stop to ask ourselves what led them to act that way? Not to justify their behavior, but to understand that no one is born evil, that we are all the result of our experiences and decisions. Epictetus taught us that we should not judge people solely by their actions, but understand that each one acts according to their level of knowledge and understanding. If someone is disrespectful, perhaps it is because they have never known another way to relate. If someone betrays, perhaps it is because they have lived in fear their whole life. It does not mean accepting the harm, but understanding that it is not always personal, that many times others act from their own confusion, not from a conscious desire to do evil. In a society, people react according to their environment and their circumstances. An individual can be kind to their family and ruthless in business. They can be generous with their friends and cold with strangers. But these contradictions do not mean that they are a bad person, but that they are human. We have all, at some point, acted in ways that we are not proud of. We have all made mistakes, said hurtful words, made impulsive decisions. If we judge others harshly, we should apply the same criterion to ourselves. And if we want to be understood for our moments of weakness, why not do the same with others? When we stop labeling people as good or bad, our relationships improve. We no longer react with so much frustration to the faults of others because we understand that everyone is in their own learning process. We become more patient, more equanimous. It does not mean tolerating abuse or accepting injustice, but learning to respond with wisdom instead of reacting with anger. Marcus Aurelius said that when someone acts badly, we should ask ourselves if we really expected it to be otherwise. People act as they can, according to what they have learned, according to what their mind allows them to see. If we expect perfection from others, we will be constantly disappointed. Freeing ourselves from this mentality helps us find inner peace. We do not feel the need to punish, to react with resentment, to divide the world into allies and enemies. We become more objective, more serene, more capable of handling conflicts with clarity. True strength is not in judging others harshly, but in understanding that we are all on the same journey, at different stages, but with the same destination: to learn and improve. When you understand this, you stop wearing yourself out with the behavior of others and focus on the only thing you can really control: your own evolution. Number 15. The RAIN process for managing anger. Anger is a powerful emotion, but it doesn't have to control you. It can seem like an uncontrollable fire that consumes you in the moment. But if you learn to manage it with intelligence, it becomes a tool for growth instead of a weapon of destruction. The RAIN process is a technique that helps you manage anger effectively, without suppressing it or acting impulsively. It is a method based on mindfulness and self-reflection, something that the Stoics already applied in their daily lives without giving it a specific name. Through RAIN, we can observe our anger without being carried away by it, understanding its origin and transforming its energy into something positive. The first step is to recognize that anger is occurring. Don't deny it, don't suppress it, but realize that it is there. Many times when we get angry, we react without thinking, as if we were on autopilot. We get carried away by the emotion without even realizing what is really happening inside of us. But if, at the moment anger appears, you pause and say, "I am feeling anger right now," you immediately create a separation between the emotion and yourself. Marcus Aurelius spoke of the importance of observing our emotions as if they were external phenomena, without identifying completely with them. If you can see anger as something fleeting, as a reaction that arises but that does not define who you are, you have already taken the first step to managing it. The second step is to allow the anger to be present without acting on it. This is where most people fail because the immediate impulse is to react, to defend, to attack, or to let oneself be consumed by the emotion. But anger itself is not the problem, but what we do with it. The Stoics understood that it is not about denying emotions, but about learning to live with them without allowing them to dominate our actions. If you feel anger growing inside you instead of resisting, simply observe it. You don't have to do anything with it yet. Breathe, feel the energy in your body, but stay present. Seneca said that the first impact of anger is inevitable, but what follows is a choice. If you can be with the emotion without acting impulsively, you already have an advantage over it. The third step is to investigate the origin of the anger. Instead of getting stuck in the superficial anger, ask yourself, where does it really come from? Many times, anger is just a symptom of something deeper. It can be fear, insecurity, unfulfilled expectations, or past wounds that we have not yet healed. Epictetus taught that it is not external events that bother us, but our interpretations of them. If someone interrupts you in a conversation and that makes you angry, maybe it's not just the interruption that bothers you, but a deeper belief that you are not respected or valued. If you can get to the root of the problem, the anger loses its intensity because you understand that what you are feeling has more to do with you than with the external situation. The last step is to nurture the internal part that needs healing. This is where, instead of punishing yourself for feeling anger, you practice self-compassion. It does not mean justifying the anger, but recognizing that there is a part of you that needs to be attended to. Maybe you have been repressing certain emotions. Maybe there is a limiting belief that makes you react in a certain way. Or maybe you just need to give yourself more space to process what you feel. Marcus Aurelius said that we should treat ourselves with the same patience and understanding that we offer to others. You cannot eliminate anger completely, but you can learn to respond with wisdom instead of impulsivity. As you practice this process, you will notice that anger loses power over you. It does not mean that you will never get angry again, but that when you do, you will know exactly how to handle it without it destroying your peace or affecting your relationships. You will learn that anger is just a passing emotion, not an order that you must obey. Instead of acting from reaction, you will act from reflection. And in that space of consciousness, you will find true emotional freedom. If this message resonated with you, go to the comments and write, "Today, my best version begins. I am Stoic." By doing so, you reaffirm your commitment to live with more reason, calm, and discipline. Don't let emotions control you. Take charge of your life. See you in the next one.